My name is Leona Grant, and the day I realized I was no longer part of my own family wasn't the day they sold the lake house without telling me. It wasn't when they cut me out of the inheritance, or when they called me dramatic for asking where the money went. It was a Tuesday, actually. Sunny. Quiet. The kind of day you wouldn't remember, except I remember everything. I had just come home from work, groceries in hand, trying to call my dad because I needed the garage code. That's when I saw it. My brother Miles had posted pictures from the family's weekend cabin trip. The whole family was there. My parents, my cousin Jared, even Uncle Ron, who hates driving. But I wasn't in a single photo, not one, and I wasn't invited, not even told it was happening. I stared at those pictures, the ones with my family all laughing by the fire pit, roasting marshmallows, sitting in the Adirondack chairs I helped stain. I remember sanding those things for hours with my mom while she told me stories about her childhood. Now, they weren't just sitting in my memory, they were sitting in my house. And I was no longer welcome. But that wasn't the first exclusion. It was just the one I couldn't ignore. The truth is, I'd been fading from the family photo long before that, just not literally. I was the one who took the calls when my dad lost his job. I covered the second mortgage when my parents were behind. I co-signed Miles's first business loan when he couldn't qualify. I showed up. Every time. Birthdays, emergencies, last-minute errands, college move-ins. I was the family's back pocket. Quiet. Reliable. Replaceable. Until suddenly, I wasn't just replaceable. I was erased. What made it worse was the silence. The easy way they kept going without me. Like removing me was as effortless as cropping a picture. No questions asked. No explanations offered. I started to wonder, had I done something wrong? Did I miss a sign? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I hadn't changed. They had. Or maybe they hadn't. Maybe this was always who they were. And I just never let myself see it. The slow burn of that realization, it doesn't scorch all at once. It simmers. It eats at you. I kept thinking maybe they'd call. Maybe there was some mistake. But the calls never came. Not for birthdays. Not for holidays. Not even when I ended up in urgent care after slipping on ice outside the same house I used to shovel for them every winter. So if you've ever had to sit with the kind of grief that comes not from losing someone, but from realizing they never truly saw you, you're not alone. I learned the hard way that sometimes the most painful betrayals don't come with shouting matches. They come quietly, through unanswered texts, through missing names on invitations, through blank spaces where your name used to be. And that's where my story begins. Everyone loved the Grants. If you ever visited our neighborhood in Savannah, Georgia, especially during the holidays, you'd know why. Our house sat on the corner lot with manicured hedges, perfect white shutters, and a wraparound porch that always smelled like warm vanilla and fresh pine. My mother, Beverly, was the kind of woman who made hosting look effortless, lemon bars always cooling on the counter, jazz humming from the vintage record player, and cloth napkins folded just so. My father, Victor, had that polished Southern charisma people loved to quote at weddings and barbecues. He worked in insurance, played golf on Saturdays, and always kept a running tab for whoever came to his favorite bar. And then there was my brother, Miles the Golden Boy, captain of the high school debate team, full ride to Yale, engaged by 28 to a woman who could have easily passed for a Kennedy. If you saw the Grants from the outside, you saw a family who'd done everything right. Clean, respectable, charming, but I was always the quieter one. I didn't crave attention like Miles did, didn't have my parents' flair for performance. I was just useful. I paid the property taxes when Dad forgot, handled the bank dispute when Mom's card was flagged. I helped Miles clean up a business disaster when his first startup nearly tanked and co-signed the loan that bailed him out. I was the one who stayed late after family dinners to wash the dishes while everyone else moved to the living room with wine glasses and laughter. No one ever asked me to, but no one ever thanked me either. What I didn't realize at the time was that usefulness is not the same thing as belonging. And in my family, it became clearer with each passing year that once your usefulness runs out, or worse, once you stop offering it, you're just another piece they'll quietly rearrange or remove. It started subtly. I remember one year I wasn't in the group family photo for the Christmas card. You were out of town, my mom said with a smile, even though I'd cut my business trip short to be there. Then came the missed tags on social media. Every holiday album posted by Miles's fiancé had captions like, "The Grants gathered again," with only 6 of the 7 of us pictured. I'd be the one taking the photo or cropped out by some unspoken algorithm that decided I no longer fit the frame. My name started showing up wrong on mailed invitations. Once it was Leah. Another time just guest. A neighbor once asked if I was a cousin visiting from out of state. I laughed it off, but the truth settled like sediment in my chest. Still, I excused it. I chalked it up to oversight, busyness, the chaos of modern life. After all, I wasn't a kid anymore. We all had our own lives. But deep down, I knew the shift wasn't about distance or distraction. It was about priority. And I was slipping further and further down their list. I remember the first time I truly felt disposable. It was 3 days after Mom had surgery. I'd taken off work, stayed at her bedside through the night, made soup, did her laundry, even fixed her laptop. That Saturday, I overheard her on the phone with a friend say, "Thank God Miles and Thalia came to help. It made me feel so loved." I sat in the next room with the same soup I'd made her, going cold in my lap. I told myself it was just a slip of the tongue. But it wasn't. Because the next week, she posted about it on Facebook. A picture of her and Miles with the caption, "Family shows up when it counts, my rocks." I wasn't tagged. I wasn't even mentioned. That's when I started noticing how often I was only brought up when someone needed something. A document signed, a ride to the airport, help filing taxes. No one ever said thank you, it was more like a given. Like that was my role in the Grant family hierarchy. Reliable background character. Always available. Never central. Replaceable. When I bought my own house in East Savannah, a small 2-bedroom with a creaky porch and a lemon tree in the backyard, my parents never visited. Not once. "Oh, it's so far," my mom would say, even though it was 18 minutes away. When Miles got engaged and hosted a garden party, they drove 2 hours to Atlanta for it, smiling in every photo, matching outfits and all. Meanwhile, I spent that weekend alone, repainting my living room, wondering why I kept offering them chances to show up. Still, I tried. I bought thoughtful gifts. I organized Thanksgiving when Mom said she was tired. I even paid for Dad's dental surgery when his insurance didn't cover it. I never brought it up. I didn't want to be the one who kept score. But looking back, I should have. Because I was the only one playing fair. They loved to paint a picture of a perfect family, but behind the scenes, everything was about control. Appearances mattered more than honesty. Loyalty was expected, but never reciprocated. I became painfully aware that the moment I stopped complying, stopped giving, stopped nodding politely at the subtle insults I would be cast out, branded ungrateful. The threat wasn't just being excluded. The threat was being rewritten. And when it happened, it wasn't loud. It was a slow, meticulous edit. Like erasing pencil marks on a family tree. One day, the framed photo from my graduation disappeared from the mantel. The next, a framed print of Miles's second promotion took its place. My name wasn't mentioned in family updates to relatives. When my great-aunt passed and I flew to the funeral, a distant cousin said, "I didn't know you were still in touch with the family." I was standing right there. Still in touch. Still trying. But trying wasn't enough. Not when the people you're trying for have already decided they're better off without you. Not when they've traded your presence for a cleaner narrative, one where they can pose in matching sweaters and call it love. The worst part? I kept hoping. Even as they overlooked me. Even as they silenced me. Even as they chipped away at every piece of connection we once had, I still hoped someone would notice. That maybe one of them would pull me aside and say, "I'm sorry, we didn't realize." But no one ever did. Because to admit it would mean admitting the truth of who they'd become and who they'd turned me into. So, if you've ever found yourself in a family where love feels like currency, where affection is doled out based on compliance, and where showing up is never enough, you're not crazy, you're not imagining it. And you're not alone. That was the house I grew up in. Beautiful on the outside, hollow on the inside. I just didn't see it clearly until the day I was erased from it completely. It was supposed to be just another family celebration, one of those perfectly staged events my mother thrived on. Miles and Thalia's engagement party, held at the country club where Mom volunteered twice a month just to stay connected. When I pulled into the lot that afternoon, my Honda felt wildly out of place next to the lineup of Range Rovers and European SUVs. I had taken the time to wash it that morning, polished the dash with lemon oil, wore a simple cream-wrap dress and low heels, elegant but understated. Still, as I handed the keys to the valet, I felt the familiar prickle of not quite belonging. That feeling had been growing for years, like ivy climbing a wall I thought I had built strong enough. The entryway sparkled. Crystal glasses clinked softly on silver trays, and every table centerpiece was a showpiece: orchids, floating candles, glittered name cards. The kind of atmosphere that made people smile tightly and whisper about who showed up in what. I gave my name at the registration table, expecting the usual awkward silence. But this time, the young woman checking the list actually furrowed her brow and tilted the clipboard toward me. She said, finger trailing the page. You're listed as +1, under family friends. Should I fix that? I felt the heat rush to my chest before I even processed the words. No, I said, forcing a smile. It's fine. It wasn't. But I'd learned not to make a scene. I pinned the guest badge to my dress like a scarlet letter and moved through the party with that hollow grace I'd mastered, smiling without warmth, hugging without anchoring. I spotted my parents near the fireplace, surrounded by friends, laughing with practiced ease. They didn't wave. Miles, in a tailored navy suit, was making the rounds like a senator. Thalia sparkled at his side. The kind of beautiful that came with inherited confidence. I stayed near the back, drinking sparkling water and pretending I wasn't silently counting the number of people who didn't look me in the eye. Dinner was a 3-course affair. My seat was tucked beside the swinging doors to the kitchen, the only table without a floral centerpiece. The place setting in front of me had a crooked napkin folded in what I think was meant to be a swan, but its wings sagged like it had given up halfway. I smiled sadly at it, unable to ignore the metaphor. The lights dimmed after dessert. A soft hush fell as a spotlight lit the small stage. I thought we were transitioning to toasts, but then the MC, some PR friend of Thalia's, called out my name. And now, a few words from someone very special to the couple. Please welcome Leona Grant. What? I froze in my seat. No one had told me I'd be speaking. I looked around. Miles gave a tight-lipped nod. Thalia smiled. Mom looked poised like she'd just cued a violinist. I stood slowly, adrenaline spiking, knees stiff under the tablecloth. As I stepped into the light, my eyes struggled to adjust. I waited for someone to hand me notes. Nothing came. Then, behind me, the screen lit up. A slideshow. It started innocently: Miles as a baby. Miles in Little League. Miles at Yale. Pictures of him building his company, buying a house, hugging my parents, holding Thalia's hand. There were voiceovers. Miles has always been the heart of this family, my mother said in that polished, syrupy tone. He's the son every parent dreams of. My father chimed in. He's built everything from scratch. We're just so proud. They never mentioned the $40,000 loan I gave Miles during his first failed expansion. Or the late nights I stayed up fixing his pitch deck. Or the time I let him crash on my couch for a month when he and Thalia broke up for a while and no one else knew. And they sure as hell didn't mention me. I watched the entire thing, standing silently, smiling, because I knew if I didn't, the narrative would shift again. Leona couldn't even be happy for her brother, they'd say. She made it about herself. So I smiled. Until the lights rose again, and my mother, in her sequined wrap, stood and walked up beside me with her wine glass raised. Oh, Leona, she laughed, turning to the crowd. Wouldn't it be the perfect gift if you handed over the lake house tonight? I stared at her. The room did too. A few people chuckled nervously. Someone muttered, "Is she serious?" She was. I glanced at Miles. He looked down at his plate. Thalia touched his wrist but didn't speak. My father stayed seated, raising his glass like a judge waiting for the verdict. You know, my mother said, Miles and Thalia are starting their life together. You're always traveling for work. That house would mean so much to them. I blinked. Once. Twice. That wasn't agreed on, I said, into the microphone, my voice louder than I meant, sharper than I expected. The crowd stiffened. "Oh, sweetie, don't be dramatic," she said, waving her hand like she was swatting a fly. "It's just a gesture, a symbol of love. Number." It was a trap, an ambush in pearls. I wanted to scream. List every bill I'd covered, every holiday I hosted, every time I stayed quiet to keep peace. But something in me cracked open. Instead, clean and cold. I set the microphone down gently. The thunk echoed across the room like a dropped gavel. I walked off stage in silence. I made it 10 steps before I saw my father standing near the dessert table. His jaw was clenched, his eyes sharp. I thought he was reaching for another drink, but instead, he grabbed the champagne bottle by the neck and swung it. It caught me just above my temple. I didn't black out, but the world tilted. People gasped. Someone dropped a fork. My hand shot up instinctively, pressing against the warmth sliding down my cheek. I heard the sharp intake of breath from someone nearby. My mother's voice, low but unmistakable. "You ungrateful girl. We gave you everything." Everything? I stood there, dizzy, bleeding, shaking but not broken. "Not anymore." No one stepped forward. Not even Miles. My cousin Jonah, always too late for everything, whispered, "Call the police," but didn't move. I made my own way to the door. Head high, hands sticky with blood. No tears. Not then. That night, I sat in the ER under fluorescent lights, filling out forms while blood crusted on my hairline. No one from the party called. No texts. No apologies. And in that sterile, humming silence, I realized something. That was the last time I would ever show up for people who had already decided I didn't matter. I didn't sleep the night after the hospital visit. The city outside my window buzzed like it always had, cars rumbling, distant sirens, someone arguing on the sidewalk about a missed lift, but my apartment was silent in a way that felt brutal. I sat curled on the edge of my couch in blood-streaked pajamas with the gauze still taped to my head, holding a cup of chamomile tea I couldn't bring myself to sip. The silence wasn't comforting, it was accusatory. And yet, in the stillness, I finally saw everything clearly. This wasn't just a slap or a bottle to the skull. This wasn't about the lake house or some failed toast. This was a declaration. You are not one of us anymore, and you never really were. So I started thinking not about revenge, but about reclamation. There's a difference. Revenge wants an audience. Reclamation? It happens quietly, efficiently, legally. The next morning, I made 2 calls, one to my job, telling them I was taking a few days off, and the other to Aiden Flores, a civil attorney I met at a business seminar 2 years ago. He didn't remember me at first, but when I mentioned the grants, his tone shifted. "Yeah," he said. "I remember you now. You took notes the whole time and stayed after to ask about property laws." I told him what happened, every part, from the forged listing to the champagne bottle. He didn't gasp, didn't say, "Oh my God." He just asked one question. "Do you have proof?" "Yes," I said, "and I'm ready to go all in." By noon, I was standing outside my lake house with a locksmith. The weather had turned that dry, Georgia crisp sunlight that burns if you stand still too long. I watched the man work, his movements precise, methodical. He pointed out faint scratch marks near the lock. Someone's been going in and out. It's not forced entry, just unpracticed. I nodded. They'd used my key. The spare I usually kept in my purse had been missing for a week, ever since that family dinner where Dad accidentally grabbed my bag on his way out. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time, but now, it made sense. Every piece fell into place like a puzzle I didn't know I'd been solving for years. I changed all the locks. Front, back, even the shed. Installed a new alarm system, one with fingerprint entry and live camera backup. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. My house had become a battlefield, and I wasn't going to lose it quietly. That night, back in my apartment, I couldn't sit still. I paced, reread emails, pulled up bank statements. Everything I'd ever sent to my parents or Miles: $1,200 for Dad's bridge work, $6,500 to cover Mom's property tax penalty, the $40 Kelvin loan to Miles with the vague, "I'll pay you back as soon as I can." I built a digital folder labeled Truth. I added PDF after PDF, screenshots, emails with subject lines like, "Can you cover just this one time?" and "We'll make it up to you." They never did. But I had receipts. I sent everything to Aiden that night. No explanation, no narrative, just raw evidence. I think I fell asleep at some point, head against the kitchen table, laptop still glowing. When I woke up at 6:47 a.m., there was already a reply waiting. "Got it. You're in a stronger position than you think. Call me at 9. Let's draw up a notice of interest and begin the restraining order filing." I stared at the screen for a long time. Stronger than you think. No one had said that to me before, not without an unless or a but attached. Over the next 72 hours, I became a version of myself I hadn't met yet. Cold. Focused. Relentless. The kind of woman who spoke calmly about legal filings while reheating leftover soup. The kind of woman who stopped checking for her mother's name on the phone screen. I filed a notice of interest on the lake house, ensuring it couldn't be sold, listed, or transferred without my permission. Then Aiden pulled the real shocker. "They've been living in your parents' house under assumption," he said on our Thursday call. "What do you mean?" "I mean, technically you still own that house. Remember that foreclosure rescue you did back in 2010? The deed was never formally transferred back. They never refinanced. They've been living there based on trust and memory." I sat back in my chair, stunned. I had completely forgotten. That was the year Dad's company almost went under. I used my credit to buy the deed temporarily so they wouldn't lose the home. We said we'd fix it later. But later never came. "They've been trespassing," Aiden continued. "Want to proceed?" It was tempting to call them, to give one last chance. But then I remembered the blood on my temple, the sound of the bottle connecting, the silence afterward. I remembered being 11 years old and overhearing my mom say, "Leona's smart, but hard to love." I remembered every year they made me feel like an obligation instead of a daughter. "No," I said. "File everything." We didn't post warnings. No Facebook fights. No dramatic phone calls. Just official paperwork. The way they always liked to handle things, through paperwork and silence. The eviction order was served 3 days later. I didn't see it in person, but Miles posted a grainy clip from their Ring camera to the family group chat, as if I should feel ashamed. It showed my dad opening the door in a stained robe, blinking at the sheriff with a piece of toast in one hand. My mother hovered in the background with a mug mid-sip, frozen in disbelief. The officer handed over the envelope. No yelling, no crying, just a quiet dismantling. I watched the clip twice, then deleted it. Not out of guilt, out of completion. There was nothing more to say. That night, I lit a single candle on my windowsill. Not as a vigil, as a marker. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't hoping for a change. I had stepped out of the storm and closed the door behind me. But the strangest part? I didn't feel victorious. I didn't pop champagne or scream into the void. I felt steady. Like I had finally taken my hands off a rope I'd been gripping for too long. The rope of their approval. Of, "Maybe next time." Of, "You're overreacting." When you stop chasing people who never meant to hold you, you don't crash, you land. And I had landed. Back in my lake house. Back in my body. Back in my name. And this time, no one would take it from me again. They didn't take the loss quietly. I didn't expect them to. But what I didn't expect, what caught me completely off guard, was how loud they chose to make it. It started with a Facebook post from my mother, Beverly, less than 24 hours after the eviction notice was served. A glossy picture of her standing in front of their former house, head bowed slightly, holding a box labeled Memories. It was the kind of picture that could have been mistaken for a stock photo if you didn't recognize the street. The caption beneath it read, "We raised her with love. We made sacrifices. We never expected betrayal." That last word, betrayal, was bolded. And just like that, they made their move. The comment section filled quickly. So sorry, Bev. Family can be the hardest pain. Hope you're okay, sweet friend. I wasn't tagged, but I didn't have to be. People knew, and the ones who didn't would soon find out. By the next day, Miles posted a video on Instagram, a carefully edited clip from the engagement party. It showed me standing stiffly under the spotlight, my voice cracking as I said, "This wasn't agreed on." No context. Just that one moment, spliced between clips of him smiling with balloons, Thalia laughing with a glass of champagne, and a piano loop playing softly in the background. The caption? Sometimes you give people everything, and they still make you the villain. Number family matters. Number broken hearts. Number daughter of stranger. I stared at the screen in disbelief. They weren't just trying to erase me now, they were actively replacing me with a character they had created. A cold, ungrateful daughter. A woman with a vendetta. A villain who evicted her aging parents and ruined her brother's life out of spite. And the worst part? People believed it. At first I didn't know what to do. My instinct was to scream. Defend myself. Comment. Post a thread explaining everything, from the forged house listing to the champagne bottle. But I stopped. Because I realized something. I didn't need to fight their story. I had something stronger than spin. I had evidence. I opened my Dropbox and created a new folder. I named it If You Care to Know. Inside, I uploaded everything. Wire transfers dating back to 2014, covering utilities, medical bills, mortgage payments. Screenshots of texts from my mother asking for money. Just this once. A saved voicemail from Miles asking if I could cover Thalia's emergency dental bill until his bonus hits. A scanned copy of the deed to the lake house. Even a screenshot of the realtor's voicemail confirming my property was almost sold behind my back. No captions, no commentary, just proof. I copied the public link and sat with it for a while. I didn't rush to post it. I didn't blast it in every group chat. I sent it quietly. To 3 people. My godmother in Tallahassee. My old piano teacher. And Uncle Marvin. My mother's estranged brother who had been cut off years ago for reasons I was never told. He replied within an hour. Saw the folder. About time someone told the truth. If you need a witness, I'm here. That one text made the week of silence worth it. Later that night, I did post the link on my personal page, no fanfare, no explanation, just, I've stayed silent out of loyalty, but silence shouldn't cost you your name. If you care to know the truth, here it is. Then I closed the app. I didn't wait for reactions. I didn't need validation anymore. That part of me desperate to be seen, to be understood by the very people who had erased me was gone, burned out in the fluorescent lights of that ER. Or maybe shattered with the first crack of that champagne bottle. Either way, I wasn't her anymore. What followed wasn't viral. It didn't trend. There was no explosion. It was quieter than that, more powerful for it. Over the next few days, I received messages, private ones, from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, from coworkers who'd only ever met my parents in holiday party anecdotes, from people who had once looked at me sideways and now saw me with new eyes. I read it all. I believe you. I remember that trip when they asked you to cover the hotel and never paid you back. I'm sorry. I knew something was off at the engagement party. Thank you for saying what none of us could. They weren't loud messages, but they were real. And they were enough. Because the truth doesn't need volume. It needs clarity. It needs space. And I had finally cleared enough of their noise to let it speak. But that didn't stop them from trying again. A week later, Thalia sent me an invitation. A baby shower. Embossed. Expensive. At the bottom, in slanted handwriting, was a note. I'm sorry, I didn't know how far they'd go. You deserved better. I held the card for a long time. Part of me wanted to throw it out. Another part, the one still bruised but no longer broken, recognized the courage it takes to even begin acknowledging harm. So I didn't go to the shower, but I did write a check to the local women's shelter in her honor. In the memo line, I wrote, "For the women who stayed silent too long." That felt right. What surprised me most, though, was what came next. Not another smear campaign. Not a new video or post, but a silence I didn't have to defend myself against. The kind of silence that wasn't lonely but earned. In that silence, I cooked again. Not to impress or appease, just because I wanted pasta with garlic and thyme. I invited Amina over, an old friend who once told me, "I don't need you to be the strong one, I need you to be real." We ate on the balcony, wine glasses sweating in the summer air, the city humming around us. At one point, she reached for my phone, flipped it over, and placed it face down. "This isn't where your story lives anymore," she said. And she was right. Because for the first time in years, my story wasn't shaped by what they said about me, it was shaped by what I reclaimed. Not just property, not just reputation, but presence, peace. The kind that doesn't need to clap back or post receipts every time someone throws dirt. The kind that says, "I know who I am. That's enough." And I was enough. I always had been. They just didn't want to see it because seeing it meant acknowledging what they lost when they let me go. So no, I didn't lose my family. They lost me. And that truth? That quiet, steady, unshakable truth? It didn't need hashtags. It needed time. And now, it had it. It was the kind of message that made my breath hitch, not because I was surprised, but because some fragile, long-buried piece of me still hoped it meant what it said. "Let's talk," the subject line read, signed simply, Mom. I stared at it on my phone for almost 10 full minutes. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I knew exactly what they wanted me to do. I was supposed to see it and soften. I was supposed to imagine we were a family again, if just for an afternoon. But I wasn't the woman who used to fold napkins for their dinner parties, hoping her presence was enough to earn love. I'd buried her under court filings and silence that said more than tears ever could. Still, I clicked it open. The email was short, polished, almost sterile in its precision. "Leona, we love you. This has gone too far. Please come by the house. Just us, no guests. Let's fix this. Mom, fix this." As if the problem was cracked china or a spilled glass of wine. As if they hadn't tried to sell my house. As if my father hadn't struck me in public and then stood there while the room watched me bleed. But I showed up anyway. Not for them. For myself. Because sometimes you go back not to reconnect, but to confirm that walking away was the right decision all along. The driveway looked exactly the same, not a pebble out of place. Solar lights blinked from the flower beds I used to weed as a teenager, and the porch swing swayed lightly in the breeze, though no one had sat there in years. My mother opened the door before I knocked, as if she'd been watching from the window. She smiled wide, rehearsed, 3 degrees too cold, and pulled me into a hug that smelled like lavender and strategy. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. I stepped inside. The living room had been staged, no other word for it. Fresh orchids on the coffee table. A tray of lemon tea and shortbread cookies. My childhood favorite. Photos of me that hadn't been on display since college suddenly framed and centered. A picture of me and Miles on the lake dock. My high school debate team photo. All the greatest hits of a daughter they had spent the last decade quietly cropping out. The lighting was soft. The furniture was arranged like we were filming a commercial for forgiveness. But I knew better. I'd been raised in this theater. Miles sat perched on the edge of the couch, lips tight, eyes tired. He didn't stand. Thalia wasn't there, probably for the best. My father entered from the hallway holding a manila envelope. His face was unreadable, a mixture of tired and smug, like he knew this meeting was a formality and assumed the ending had already been written. "We've been thinking," he said, easing into the armchair like this was just another Sunday family meeting, "about how to keep things clear. Fair. No more misunderstandings." He extended the envelope toward me. My stomach coiled. "What is it?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Just something to clarify family roles. Avoid confusion," he said. I opened it slowly. Thick paper. Legal phrasing. But the title screamed louder than any sentence inside. Deed transfer agreement. There it was. Again. Still. Even now. "You're asking me to sign over the lake house," I said quietly. My mother folded her hands, smiling with mock serenity. It's just a formality, sweetheart. You don't need that much space. You're always working, always traveling. You're not even reading it, my father added, voice clipped. Don't you trust us? That was the moment I knew they hadn't changed. They never planned to. This wasn't reconciliation, it was choreography. A final attempt to cast me as the loving daughter one last time, just long enough to hand over the only thing I still owned that they wanted. They hadn't called to apologize. They called because the eviction had hurt their pride, and they needed to reclaim power the only way they knew how, through control dressed up as family. I placed the envelope back on the table with calm fingers. You set this up to look like love, I said. But it's theater. The cookies. The old photos. The orchids. It's not peace. It's a set. No, Leona. My mom said quickly, voice faltering for the first time. We're trying to reconnect. No, I replied. You're trying to re-own me. The room went very still. My father shifted in his seat. That's not fair. What's not fair, I said, still composed, is spending a lifetime giving to a family who only knows how to receive. What's not fair is being hit and then erased. And what's definitely not fair is walking into this house thinking, maybe, just maybe, you wanted me back, only to find another contract waiting for my signature. Miles finally spoke. It's just property, Leona. I turned to look at him. It's not about the property. It's about what you think I'm worth. No one moved. No one apologized. I stood. Slowly. My chair barely creaked. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't demand closure. I didn't need it. I'm not signing anything, I said. Not now, not ever. I walked toward the door. My mother called after me, her voice brittle and panicked. Leona, we love you. I paused just long enough to say without turning. You love the version of me that stays quiet and hands over everything. That version doesn't live here anymore. Then I walked out. Not with rage, not with sadness, but with certainty. Back in my car, the tears came. But they weren't grief. They were release. I let them fall while I dialed Aiden. File the injunction, I said. We're not playing anymore. He answered with one word. Done. That night, I lit every candle in my house. Made pasta. Played Nina Simone loud enough to drown out old memories. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the middle of my dining room, not because I had something to prove, but because I finally had nothing left to lose. And that kind of freedom? It's quiet. But it echoes. Sometimes peace doesn't come wrapped in apologies or stitched into olive branches. Sometimes it arrives in a manila envelope you never sign. Sometimes it's a locked door you never reopen. And sometimes it's just a daughter choosing herself. Healing doesn't come like thunder. It doesn't arrive with dramatic music or some cinematic montage of transformation. Sometimes it just shows up in the form of a morning when your phone doesn't buzz with drama and your heart doesn't brace for disappointment. That morning came for me 3 days after walking out of my parents' staged peace offering. I woke up before my alarm, sunlight filtering softly through the linen curtains in my bedroom. The apartment was quiet. No voice, no tension, just stillness. And for once, I didn't feel the need to fill it. I made myself tea black, no sugar, and stood by the kitchen window while it steeped. Outside, the neighbor's sprinkler sputtered to life, misting the sidewalk in perfect rhythm. I thought of the dinner parties I used to organize at the lake house, the napkin folds I practiced until my fingers cramped, trying to make everything just right so maybe, just maybe, they'd see how hard I was trying. I remembered the time I stayed up till 2 a.m. baking a triple-layer cake for Mom's birthday because the bakery messed up her order. She never noticed it was homemade. Just said the frosting was too sweet. And now, here I was, alone in a kitchen that I owned, drinking tea I'd brewed for no one but myself, and it felt enough. That day, I went through storage boxes I hadn't touched in years. Deep under old tax folders and notebooks, I found a dusty photo album from high school. The cover was cracked leather, the corners curling inward like it had been waiting for me. Inside, there were photos of a girl I barely recognized, freckles, frizzy hair, braces, smiling, not because someone told her to, but because she wanted to. There were pictures from science fair wins, debate tournaments, even a terrible school dance where my corsage wilted before I made it to the punch bowl. In the middle of the album, tucked between two wrinkled pages, was a sticky note. I unfolded it slowly, the edges brittle with time. It was in my father's handwriting. "Kez knew you had it in you. Proud of you, kid." Dad. It hit me like a whisper. That at some point before the manipulation, before the erasure, there had been love. Real love. But I also understood, standing there in my quiet home, that love from the past doesn't excuse harm in the present. We're allowed to mourn what was, and still reject what is. That night, I didn't light candles or post a cryptic quote online. I just made dinner pasta with garlic and thyme and set 2 plates. Not out of habit, out of intention. Amina arrived 15 minutes later, holding a bottle of wine in one hand and a tiny orchid in the other. "You need more green in here," she said, placing it gently by the window like it had always belonged there. We ate slowly. Talked about work, books, a show she swore I'd love and I swore I'd never watch. At one point, she reached across the table, tapped the soft swan-shaped napkin I had laid out, not folded perfectly like before, just gently creased from memory. "You keep this from the party?" she asked. I nodded. "Why?" I ran my fingers over its edge. "Because it reminds me that I was there. That I mattered even when they tried to make it look like I didn't." She didn't say anything, just refilled my glass and raised her own. "To building our own tables," I said. "And never begging for a seat again," she replied. We clinked. It wasn't a toast to vengeance. It was a toast to release. Later that night, after she left, I sat at the dining table in the dark. The city lights blinked softly beyond the window. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel empty. I felt still. And in that stillness, I realized I had stopped checking my phone. Stopped checking for their approval. Stopped waiting for a version of them that would never come. And yet there was still more to close. The next day I drove back to the house. Not theirs anymore, mine. The one I saved in 2010. The one they'd taken over by memory, assumption, and guilt. The moving truck was already in the driveway, its back door wide open, workers moving boxes like clockwork. The realtor nodded at me from the gate, clipboard in hand, efficient and unemotional. "Final walk. Through in 10?" she said. I nodded and stepped inside. It was empty. Not just in furniture, but in feeling. No framed portraits. No school pictures. Not even the echo of footsteps that once ran down the hallway on Christmas morning. The walls looked tired, like even they had held too many secrets. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon and wood polish. I walked through it slowly, stopping at the corner of the living room where I used to build pillow forts. At the hallway where I once overheard my mom tell a friend, "Leona's dependable, but she's not exactly warm." At the bathroom where I'd cleaned up my own bloody temple without a single family member calling to ask if I was okay. On the kitchen counter was a letter. My name was printed on the envelope in stiff black font, not handwritten, not personal. I opened it with flat fingers. This was never your home anyway. No signature. No warmth. Just a final shot fired through a closing door. I didn't flinch. Didn't reread it. I folded the letter in half then again and slipped it into my coat pocket. A footnote. Nothing more. As I turned to leave, something tugged at me. I walked to the hallway closet, one of those low cabinets beneath the stairs nobody ever used. I pulled the door open. Inside was a single shoebox. No label. No markings. Just dust. And time. I carried it to the kitchen island and opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph. I was 8. Gap-toothed and triumphant, holding a science trophy taller than my arms. I'd built a volcano that actually erupted on stage. I remember that day. I stood on stage alone, but I felt full. Beneath the photo was a swan-shaped napkin, that napkin. Not a copy. The same one from the engagement party. Slightly stained, folded just so, a little frayed on the edge. I didn't know who kept it. Maybe someone meant to toss it and forgot. Maybe someone meant to hold on to it and didn't know why. But it was still here. And it was mine. I closed the lid, pressed it to my chest for a long moment, and then walked outside. The sun was high now, casting long shadows over the driveway. I handed the box to the realtor. "This stays with me." She nodded, said nothing. Sometimes people just know when an object carries more than dust. Back home, I placed the shoebox on the bookshelf next to the orchid Amina brought. I laid the napkin at the center of the dining table. It didn't need perfect folds anymore. It didn't need to impress anyone. It was enough. Just like me. That night as I climbed into bed, I didn't brace myself for pain. I didn't check my phone. I didn't whisper goodnight to people who weren't listening. I simply closed my eyes. And for the first time in years, I dreamed about a home I hadn't built for someone else. I dreamed about one I built for me. Some endings don't arrive with slammed doors or final arguments. Sometimes, they arrive like a sigh you didn't know you'd been holding for years. That's how this chapter of my life ended, not in a storm, but in stillness. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need them to say sorry, or to understand what they had done, or to meet me halfway across a chasm they'd spent years digging. What I needed, what I finally claimed, was peace. Not the kind that requires anyone else's permission or performance. Just the kind that lets you sit in your own home, at your own table, breathing air that no longer tastes like tension. I used to think healing meant reconciliation. That someday, they'd see me clearly. That if I just gave enough, folded myself small enough, proved my loyalty long enough, they'd let me in. But I understand now. There's a difference between being part of a family and being useful to one. One is love, the other is labor. And I had spent too many years confusing the two. There's grief in realizing the people you love may never choose you back, not in the way you deserve. But there's also freedom. Freedom in knowing that you don't have to keep auditioning for love that should have been yours without question. Freedom in setting down the emotional weight of always being the reliable one, the forgiving one, the one who understands. You can walk away and still love them. You can love them and still walk away. When I think back now, I don't see villains, I see people broken by their own wounds, addicted to control, chained to image. I just no longer feel the need to chain myself to them out of guilt. I still have the swan napkin on my table, not because I want to remember the pain, but because I want to remember the lesson. That even in the smallest, most overlooked things, there is worth. That I was there. That I mattered. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not rewriting the past, not winning the argument, not even being proven right, but simply choosing to live in your own truth, without apology. That's what I do now. Every day. With every quiet morning. With every phone call I don't wait for. With every meal I cook for myself. With every story I no longer try to explain. So if you've ever had to choose yourself over people who share your blood, know this. You are not alone. Your peace matters. Your truth matters. And sometimes the strongest love is the love you give back to yourself when no one else does. If this spoke to something inside you, drop a comment. I read every one. And if you believe in healing through honesty and quiet strength, subscribe. There's more to come. Because this story doesn't end with what I lost. It begins with what I reclaimed.